Adinawa Adjagbodjou, and I'm a PhD candidate at Carnegie Mellon University. I'm in the Department of Human-Computer Interaction, and some of my research right now has been on virtual reality design. So I study how technology interacts with people and what the outcomes are.
You said that so concisely, but that's pretty major. So explain that to me, because, I like to think I'm young, but I'm really not. And so, a lot of this, the nuances in computing can be interesting and like, what are they doing? So explain that to me a little bit deeper.
Yeah, definitely. So my field broadly sort of encompasses the behavioral aspects of how people interact with computers, some of the technical aspects of how we design computers, and then also just the design itself, how we're actually deciding what people are seeing and interacting with. And so in my intersection of the work, I'm interested in how specific communities interact with those technologies, and also how we can design them better to meet the needs they have. So a lot of the projects that I do sort of take like a community-first approach to understanding how the unique attributes or the needs of those communities are either represented in technologies or the ways in which they are not and need to be designed better.
So it's almost like a deeper dive into what we, the outside folks of computing, understand to be like the digital divide?
So that's definitely one aspect that some researchers in human-computer interaction look at, but it's kind of focused more on the human-centered approach to designing. So a lot of computing historically has kind of taken a systems-first approach, where we design a technology or we make a thing that it does some function faster, but we're not really thinking about how the people who might be using it or the people who need to operate it, the challenges that they might have in using it. And so human-centered computing or human-computer interaction kind of takes the approach of who is the user and how can we design things for the user first. And by understanding the user, then what technologies should we design?
What have you found thus far in terms of the African American community? What are you finding in terms of some of the challenges of making sure that they have the same level of access and the same level of efficacy in computing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges that African American students and also researchers and computer scientists sort of deal with. I think both on the side of the education when it comes to computing, but also being able to participate in the research of computing, but then also in this third space of being negatively impacted by computing in some cases. So I've kind of dealt with each of those aspects a little bit myself. So I have a bit of a personal relation with each of these things, sort of first coming into college, wanting to pursue and being really excited about computing. And then also just being pushed out a little bit. So I think that's one of the initial challenges is, I got my first access to computers like late in high school, for example. So then coming into college and trying, even though I had that excitement, that wasn't enough. And I think that I saw that a lot with other peers of mine who were coming from the same background as me. And part of that is that I think that there just needs to be, I've seen that there needs to be a lot more exposure for, African American students coming into the computing world earlier on. And so that kind of motivated what I wanted to do in college, which was mentoring and just tutoring middle school students in computer science, because it needed to happen so much earlier for me. And that was one of the things that I noticed, is that exposure and that education just needed to happen earlier. But then even in getting access to participating in computing, once we, maybe get to that place where, we have students who have that foundation and then are excited and then want to pursue higher education in computing, there is still the challenge of access, and there's the challenge of not understanding what you need to know to be able to participate in computing at this higher level. So I think there's a big gatekeeping problem that exists, where students need a lot of mentors, even if they, you've made it through your first few courses in computing. Mentors who can really help you and sort of help you understand what you don't know when it comes to advancing, either your career or your aspirations to be a researcher in computing. And then I kind of briefly mentioned, what motivates me to do research, which is wanting to make sure that, the computers that are being created, or the technology that's being created, involves us in the process, so that we're not being harmed by, negative algorithms that are being deployed into our communities. And for that to happen, kind of all these other prior steps kind of also need to happen, where we are training computer scientists to then be in the room, or we are bringing folks that look like us into the room so that we can advocate for going out into the communities and getting our voices heard.
What does your class of peers look like at Carnegie Mellon? Do they look like you?
Not for the most part, no. I think my cohort, it's me and one other Black woman. And then I think before then, like this is speaking my department, there had been like 3 years up, there was one other Black woman. And then after our cohort, there was like 2 Black men who got in. So I think like in the span of like probably those like 4 or 5 years, there had been like 3 Black women, like, or 4 actually. There was one who was on the way out. So probably 4 Black women, and then, you know, not any Black men until I had gotten into the department, who came a year after me. So yeah, for by and large, does not look like me. And it's sad because there was a similar dynamic in college where, you know, it would be me and a couple of other people at most in these classes. And, you know, you see people start to huddle up into their groups or to do things. And it's like, you know, you have to exercise extra social capital to be able to kind of get into those in groups. But when you're struggling, you kind of need those kind of communities, and it's hard to kind of feel like you're on your own all the time.
So with that being said, what challenges would you say were great in you actually getting to this level? Because some folks don't have the stick-to-itness. They say, you know what, I'm out. This is too much for me. You all can have it. But you're still going through it. So explain to me, what has your journey looked like?
Oh yeah, it's not it's not been smooth whatsoever. I actually was part of the people who were pushed out initially. So yeah, I'll go back to that. But me even being here right now is like, it's a big surprise to me, even a little bit. So yeah, like I mentioned before, I came in my first year really excited, really pumped to, you know, do tech and do CS. And CS sometimes has this attitude where, you know, they'll have like these flashy professors who kind of like at the intro level kind of make you feel like, you know, this is this really fun thing. But what I found was that I really, really struggled in my first year, you know, really did not do well. And this was very disappointing coming from, you know, having been so high achieving and so, you know, ambitious in high school, and then getting to this, you know, elite college now, and really struggling in my first year. And just even struggles like, you know, not having the right computer, or not even having the language to communicate that, like, I didn't know how to set up so that I could start the first homework assignment. And kind of having this attitude, having other people have this attitude of like, you kind of should already know that, was just really, it was just really hard. And I found myself a lot of times that first year just being even embarrassed to show up to like office hours, because it's like, oh, people are on problem 3. I'm here to ask how to set up my computer because I don't know how to get things working. And so what ended up happening was that, you know, I really struggled that first year, even the second year, still trying to kind of make it with my major as computer science. And I did ultimately drop the major and I switched to a minor. And so I switched to a different major just because I knew that at the rate that I was going, I was going to be drowning, or I was never going to be at the skill level to sort of compete with my peers. So I switched to a different major, completed the minor, which meant I took a few other classes. But I was still really, really interested in the topic, and I felt really disappointed in myself. And I was lucky that towards like the end of my junior year, I did end up having like, you know, all it takes is just like having one professor who like actually like pours their energy into you sometimes. But I ended up having a professor like that, and a topic that I was really interested in, which is kind of my first introduction into the user-centered research, user-centered computing. And this felt like a really cool application of computing, and it kind of reignited my excitement about the field. And even though by that point, you know, it would have been too late to kind of try to go back and push through those classes, I decided to stick with the minor. And, you know, with that really big interest in the human-centered computing, really thought that year after graduation about, how I could get more involved with that. And the really great thing about human-centered computing is that it's a lot more open to people from a bunch of different backgrounds. So I spent part of the first year after I graduated taking some more courses. So I took some more of the foundational courses at NYU, actually, and then prepared to apply to the program that I'm in now. And so that was kind of my journey, was like doing a different major, being pushed out a bit, and then kind of finding like this very specific focus in computing that I was interested in, getting some of the skills that I needed, and then here I am.
I'm sorry, your undergrad was which institution?
I went to Harvard.
You buried the lead on that.
Oh.
What gives you that grit to continue to pursue this?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I think it is experiences like that where it's, being interested, being passionate is like, and, being willing to do the hard work is not enough, right? Where I think about, there's a ton of other students, even my brothers now, who are coming up behind me, who want to be involved in thinking about and imagining the future, right? And tech is going to be part of all of our futures, and thinking about the way that we are literally kept out of the room. It's just like, it upsets me, but it also really makes me want to just help future computer scientists, like researchers, be able to be part of those rooms and to kind of help them understand the resources that they need earlier on to be able to take part in, in these futures. And I think the other thing is that I really think because we are not able to be part of the room sometimes, there are so many ways in which I think that technology can specifically serve our communities that it's not able to, because of things like, the data that's being input into algorithms doesn't accurately like represent us, or, it's causing harm in our communities. And I really, I'm not a techno solutionist, I wouldn't say, but I really do think that there are ways that technology can be beneficial to our communities in some ways, like assistive technologies, for example. And I really wanted to be able to contribute to that positive aspect of computing. And, I feel like I've kind of managed to make it here despite the circumstances, despite the challenges. And I don't know, I kind of feel like it's a duty to do the most that I can now that I'm here.
You said something earlier, and I said, oh, I've got to take a note of that. You said even at one of the most challenging times, all it takes is one professor, one person to take an interest in you. Mm-hmm. So talk to me about that and how this concept of mentorship is so critical in order to diversify this field.
Oh yeah, it's one of the things that I champion the most. Like half of my Friday every single week is dedicated to mentorship, because the way that I needed that so much. I think that students generally are really curious, they're interested, and we experience things like being embarrassed, or not wanting to really express that we don't understand a concept. But when you have someone who can just have a conversation with you just as a person, right, who isn't looking, isn't just thinking about like, what grade are you making in my class, like someone who actually looks at you and looks at you as like a curious person, as a person who has aspirations, has thoughts, has perspectives that they can contribute. That is like so powerful, like as a student, to receive that and to just see someone who can see you for like the person that you are. And I think that a lot of students don't realize their own potential. And I think one of the really great things from like, I've TA'd and taught, a number of classes at this point, is just being able to see from the other side just how much students like want to know, how far they want to go, but that they don't even see like the gifts that they have in themselves. And I think sometimes you just need someone to kind of like reflect that back to you, or to give you the opportunity to express those ideas and to validate you. And I think that that's one of the really great things that mentorship does, both, on a larger, career scale, but also just like when you're struggling like in a class, or, you think that everyone gets a topic but you, just having someone who can give you that attention and just let you know that, here's another way to think about it, who can just invest that energy in you is just like really powerful. And then it kind of like leads to like this cycle where you're able to do the same for others.
You mentioned your younger brothers coming behind you, and that's a lot of what this series is about, is encouraging Black students to even consider computing as a career and a passion. What would you say to prospective students who may be looking at this and say, well, maybe this is something I can do, I'm not sure?
Well, I always lead with, if you think you can do it, you should at least give it a shot. I think it's such an exciting space. And I'm always telling people how like there's so many, if there's something that you're interested in, there's some way that like computing is like connected to it in some way, right? Especially with the future that we are kind of going into where tech is integrated into so many different things. And what I always say is that like your mind works in a very specific, cool, interesting way. You see the world in a way that like no one else sees it. And your contributions to computing, whether you think like someone else may have already thought about this, or your lived experiences, the way that, you first interacted with whatever computing devices that you use, you have something that you can contribute to the computing world, even if you don't realize it yet, because of the individual person that you are. And so, my brothers that are coming up, I'm really excited that, they're both actually doing CS majors right now. And I'm like such a proud big sister. But even just with them, so they're twins, but even with them, the way that they both think about computing, so one is like really interested in machine learning, while the other one is interested like in graphic design. So, more artistic and more statistical. Those are two different things from like two guys who grew up like in the same household. And so I think that there's so much exciting things in CS. And, it's also just a skill that I think that more and more we just all need. And I think that I kind of talk about CS now as like a language more rather than just like a skill set. It's a way to be able to understand and even just like communicate ideas. Being able to think about things like algorithmically is, it's a skill set, but it's also like a language and a way of communicating. And so I always say people should at least like try to gain those foundational skills, because I think that more and more we're going to just all need it.
This series is being produced by the IAAMCS, and their work is all about doing exactly what you're talking about, helping to diversify computing. Talk to me about the importance of this work and this intentional effort.
Yeah, I think diversity is so needed in the computing field. I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier how there are so many perspectives that we each bring to the field, but also there's the reality that for a long time the field has been, majority, white or, Asian, but our experiences, our ways of thinking are needed. But also there's been so many ways in which like minoritized communities have actually contributed to like the field now in ways that have not been as recognized. I think diversity in computing allows for the field to, avoid some of the harms that we've already seen impacting our communities, Black communities and other communities. But it also gives us a new way to imagine the future. And so, some of the work that I've done in the past has looked at like speculative design, right? This idea of imagining Black people in the future. And we need to be in the rooms in order to be part of that imagining. And to be part of those rooms, we need to kind of be welcomed into those rooms, be mentored, understand what it could look like for us to contribute. And for that to happen, we need mentors who are kind of, pulling us up or inviting us into the rooms, inviting us into the tables, or, allowing us to create new tables. And I think that there can never be enough of this work when it comes to diversifying the field, because so many of our perspectives have been kept out of these conversations for so long, but yet every time that, I see, a Black computer scientist, for example, I speak like a language that for a really long time, and I think even now, is still not on Google Translate, right? But all it took was one person who had the intersection of like natural language processing and computing and is from my country. And, they did some subset of work now, and that contribution now exists. And so that's what I really mean when I say that each of us has a unique perspective that can contribute to growing the inclusion of computing, of technologies that currently exist. And the intersections of our identities can only help to make the field better. When we think about, accessibility, or we think about just inclusion, or we think about, different aspects of our identity, those intersections that we each have that allow us to kind of look at the world differently also means that we can make technologies better and make computing better and, hopefully make the world better as well.
So my near final, I always reserve the right to ask something else. My near final question for you is, what do you hope will be your contribution to the world based on your work?
Oh, wow. That's a doozy. Yeah. I think as PhD researchers, we kind of learn to be humble because, we know that we're making one very small slice of, contributions to our field. So I'll probably answer like in twofold. But I think that when I think about my research, I think that I really want to enable the communities that I work with to be able to kind of see their needs represented in the technologies that exist, as opposed to having to sort of adapt or bend or twist things because they currently are not meeting the needs they have. And to be able to actually be able to creatively adapt and personalize technology. So in my research, that's kind of the slice that I'm really interested in. But I think more broadly, when I think about, my impact more as a whole when it comes to the computing world, I think I really do want to be able to see that people like me are not only part of the future when it comes to computing, but are taking up so much space, right, when it comes to the future of computing, that our ideas, our heritage, the things that we care about, our representation, all the aspects of ourselves are able to be, our imagination is able to be represented in the future of technology, and that it's a future that looks so different from the past that we've experienced.
That's phenomenal. I thank you so much for sharing your story with us, but inspiring so many people by sharing your story.
Yeah,
thank you so much, and best of luck. And I hope we're there when you graduate, because I want to come and cheer you on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Congratulations to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.